morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where we have some very interesting movie news stories to discuss today. But first, instead of the viewer question, I want to take a moment to address an actual news story, which I think isn't getting enough attention in the mainstream press, at least here in the United States. Some of the more, I guess you could say, older institutions of journalism are doing a pretty good job covering it, such as the New York Times. I'm going to direct you to a number of articles down below in the video description covering this story. And then also the Washington Post. I actually had a BTT viewer send me some good coverage with that publication as well. But what I'm talking about is the refugee crisis going on in Europe right now, where a number of people from the Middle East, particularly Syria and Afghanistan, are going to Europe, primarily Germany, but also Norway and Sweden. What's happening there is just absolutely fascinating. And while I know that there was a lot of coverage for the tragic story and accompanying photo about that little boy who drowned, like a 3-year-old, I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg with the story. And I think that it really shames today's journalism that that's the only part of the story they're covering. Of course it's tragic and deserves people's attention, but only if it bleeds, it leads. If there's a photo that we can plaster all over the place, great, then we'll cover it. I mean, I guess if it spurs some people to action, then that is good, but this is something that's like the history books. It's happening right in front of us. So I just want to address it for a moment and also to discuss it down below in the comments. Now, of course, I understand that some people might be like, Grace, I don't tune in to morning movie news for actual news. Well, that's perfectly fine. I totally understand it. And as always, there are annotations and links in the video description for you to skip ahead to whatever story might interest you. So, of course, no judgments. I just hope that maybe you'll have this in the back of your mind somewhere and maybe go look it up somewhere else. So I'm going to kind of give you the basics of the situation as I understand them. And of course, I'm interested to hear what everybody else has to say down below, particularly also if you're in Germany, because you're the country receiving thousands and thousands of immigrants every day. I'd be very interested to hear, and I think we all would, what's going on over there. But I think it's important to address because I think this is the biggest population displacement situation since Ellis Island, when everybody was immigrating to the United States. And that's also fascinating. It's fascinating in two regards. One, to be alive during a time when this kind of mass immigration is taking place is fascinating because we've all read about Ellis Island and here it's happening. But also, I think for as long as the United States has existed, we've been the prime destination for immigrants. You want to get a better life, you go to America. But that isn't the case anymore. All of these people want to go to Europe, which is not only, I'm sure, more accessible to them, although obviously, as you're seeing from these tragic stories, not easily accessible, but also they have wonderful social care programs there. And, I'm sure there are other elements at play here, which I would be interested to hear about. But that itself is a huge change in the way the world is seen and defined. So right there, you have a huge change. Also, with this mass population displacement, also with a different religion, this is going to drastically alter the face of Europe. And I think that a number of Europeans are worried about that, understandably so. I think this is, one of the rare cases where you're like, I'm not quite sure what to do. Usually, when you're a third party, you look at a situation, you go, okay, this seems like the right thing. But this is a situation where you're like, I don't know. I mean, this is a huge number of people for these countries to support as refugees, but at the same time, how can you ask them to stay where they are when they're being killed by ISIS? And that, I think, is interesting in and of itself, and that's the first domino here. Everybody decided to leave ISIS alone and was like, well, do we really want to fight ISIS? We've already been fighting enough stuff over there in the Middle East. Let's just let it go. But as you can see, this is the result of that foreign policy. ISIS has been allowed to do whatever they want and reign free. They're taking over that part of the world, so they're going to benefit because they're going to have an entire chunk of land, which everybody who would oppose them has left, and I don't blame them because how are they going to oppose them? They can't. The governments that have been left to deal with ISIS don't have the experience or the firepower to do so, and I'm sure there are other elements at play as well. So these are genuine refugees. This isn't like, oh, my life sucks in Syria, from like an economic standpoint or just a personal standpoint, so I'm going to go to Europe. No, this is if I stay where I am, I'm going to die. My family and my children have no future. So that's a genuine refugee. So you can't blame them for coming to Europe. So this is really a difficult situation. Now, I applaud Germany for the most part and how they're handling this. I tweeted about this last night. I felt so bad seeing the images and hearing the stories of these families, mostly families, by the way, and also very educated, middle-class citizens from Syria and Afghanistan, and trying to just, find a better life for themselves out of sheer desperation. It's just the fact that this is happening and like the whole world isn't focused on it and being like, how can we fix this? What should we do? Is just mind-boggling to me. But I tweeted about this, and a BTT viewer sent me a Washington Post story about things Germany is doing to welcome refugees. And I think it's very smart on Germany's part because they're getting so many refugees that and this is something these people are risking their lives for. So you want to make sure when they get to Germany, they feel that it was worth it. Also, if they're not going to leave because they have nowhere else to go, so you're going to have a situation where you have a very angry group of people in your country. So I think it's in not only the refugees' best interest, but in Germany's best interest to welcome these people with open arms. Also, fascinatingly, Germany has a population problem where people in Germany aren't having enough children, so they want the refugees to an extent because, they can't take everybody. They're saying we'd like other countries to take some refugees as well, but this will fix Germany's population problems. But it's going to really change decades from now what the idea of a German is, right? So that's fascinating as well. But apparently they're waiting at the train station because everyone's trying to travel by train because it's safer, although there's a tragic story going on right now about Budapest trying to hold these people in Hungary because the rest of the European Union doesn't want them just yet, so that's creating a real bottleneck problem for Budapest, which is really bizarre because these people don't even want to stay in Budapest, so they're holding them against their will in a place they don't want to stay. They're already getting people are drawing comparisons with Budapest and ISIS, the way they're handling the situations, which is not good. But back to Germany, they're welcoming people at the train station with flowers and signs saying welcome to Germany, which I think is quite touching. And also, I think they're being very proactive in that they're saying, hey, if you have an extra room, allow a refugee to live there. And the Germans are saying, well, we want them to live here not only to help them, but it will allow us to better understand this new culture. So I think that's really fantastic. And then here's, I think, one of the best policies, and that's that at German universities, I guess, which are state-run or government-run. I'm not quite sure what the terminology is in Europe, but any refugee can go and study for free. So that's fantastic because then you have a situation where refugees don't have anything to do all day, they're bettering themselves, and they'll be able to enter the job market in a far more competitive state. So I think that that's really fantastic, and it's really nice to see some positive developments coming out of this. But to see the pictures you'll see and the stories you'll hear are just, they're both fascinating and tragic, and to witness this, actually happening in front of us, the kind of things you only read about in the history books, is just absolutely amazing. And again, as I said, the ramifications this is going to have for centuries, for the rest of time, is just absolutely incredible. And the fact that people aren't paying attention to this is just shocking. It's like history is happening in front of you, and instead everyone's like, is Kanye West really running for president? Will Kim Kardashian be first lady? And you're like, there's actually some important stuff happening across the pond, and I think maybe we should all try and roll up our sleeves and figure out what to do. But it's just a really fascinating and mind-boggling situation, jaw-dropping. I've never read news stories like this. So I've put links down below in the video description, and I urge you to check them out. Also, if anybody knows about any legitimate charities that are helping refugees in Europe, please put links down below as well, because I think it would be, as an American, I'm not really quite sure what I can do from here, much further away, but I think clearly everybody needs to chip in here because this is a bad situation that we kind of all created. All right, so that's the real news story of the day. Now on to the I'm sorry, that was in place of the viewer question. I'm sorry, again, I didn't get a lot of sleep. I was reading all these stories last night, and I was just, it was really hard for me to go to sleep. I was like, what can be done? And I can't come up with a solution. I think Germany so far has the best solution, although there's a lot of anti-refugee sentiments over there, and so that's a potential powder keg waiting to explode as well. It's a lot like what happened when refugees first came to the United States in different waves, and whether or not they were welcome. Some people wanted them here, some people didn't. But as you can see, I think it turned out pretty darn well. But, you know, Europe, this is a very different situation for Europe. I mean, everyone left Europe. A lot of people did during World War II, and now they're going all back in. How many movies have you seen about people wanting to flee Berlin? Like, that's their only thing they need to do in life is to get out of Berlin. And now you have whole families being like, Berlin is the promised land. We want to get to Berlin. It's just fascinating. All right, so let's get on to some movie stories. This one's kind of a news story as well. A number of you sent me this coverage yesterday, and that's a story that's developing that the New York Times is trying to discredit the new Concussion film starring Will Smith with the trailer coming out earlier this week. And they released a story on Tuesday after the trailer debuted on Monday, talking about how, I believe that was the timeline, but anyway, saying that based on Sony emails that were released in the hack, Sony and the writer-director Peter Landesman have worked with the NFL to create something that will not offend the NFL, right? So it's really kind of basically saying, hey, don't watch Concussion, it doesn't go far enough. Which I think is, again, fascinating. That's the key word for today's episode of Morning Movie News, because if you watch the trailer for Concussion, it's pretty damning to the NFL already. I mean, we haven't even seen the movie. Like, what do they talk about? They say the NFL wants Dr. Benedamalo to say he made it all up, that this is actually not a problem for players. They insinuate that they're trying to maybe run them off the road at the very least with that rear view mirror shot in the trailer. They have Will Smith in tears saying, tell the truth, tell the truth. They have him being barred from a meeting by a security guard, so, you know, he can't enter. I know what's going on there, and you will once you see the movie. So how can anybody, and I think that is really not good journalism on behalf of the New York Times. So their European refugee coverage, top notch. Their NFL concussion coverage, not so much. Because why did they talk about the fact that the trailer already has a very negative, paints the NFL in a very negative light. So Sony and Peter Landesman were quiet for a day. I guess they wanted to decide what they were going to do. So they came back and they said, we have not done anything to appease the NFL. The only thing that we have done, and you're misreading those emails, the only thing that we've done is we have tried to make sure that we have created a situation here where we won't get sued. So Peter Landesman said, yes, I did remove a scene from the movie because while I know that this conversation took place behind closed doors between individuals associated with the NFL, because someone who was in that conversation told me about it, I didn't witness it firsthand, and I have nobody who did witness it firsthand who would be willing to go to court to back me up on that. So that's basically what he's saying there. So he said, yes, I had to cut that scene because the NFL could accuse me of making it up and I would have no evidence to prove otherwise. But in other situations, he has Dr. Benedamalo to testify, and also Dr. Benedamalo, the people who are helping him, to testify to what the NFL said and to back him up. So I think that's a smart move because you don't want to have the movie tied up with legal problems and have it discredited in that regard, right? The NFL could say, you're making stuff up. And speaking of the NFL, I actually think that this is the brilliant first wave of their campaign against this movie. And now, of course, I can't prove it, but I'm not making a movie about it. But this is my guess. No one would ever accuse the NFL of getting upset with a movie for not being mean enough to them, right? So it's a great smokescreen because it gives them a great cause of deniability. But the New York Times coverage is so slanted and so biased against the film that you have to wonder if the NFL didn't give them this story as a gift and they were just waiting for the trailer to break to try and discredit it in this way. Because, as I said, the trailer alone makes the NFL look horrible. So how can there be a news story claiming that the movie is trying to be friends with the NFL? How can the NFL ever be friends with the movie that paints it in such a negative light? If the NFL had a red pen and they were given that script and they say, in this scene, the Amalus believe the NFL is trying to kill them. With the red pen, you'd be like, take that scene out, please. You wouldn't allow it to stay. So it's absolutely insane. Another interesting bit of information to come out of this, though, is that Sony, which is planning a very big awards push for this movie, by the way, which I think is excellent because a lot of us want to see this story get out there. How horrible is it that that Hollywood has to do the news reporting now instead of the actual press? It's all because of the ratings problem that's going on with the media here, at least in the United States. But anyway, Sony is having sports journalists take the lead with coverage of this film. Who's seen the film already? Not the Hollywood Reporter or Variety or Deadline or even the LA Times. It's people from Sports Illustrated. Where did the trailer debut? From a tweet from a top Sports Illustrated journalist. So I think this is all just absolutely fascinating as well. And I'm telling you, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the first wave of the NFL's efforts to dismantle this movie and rob it of its credibility. And it's a genius move to try and rob it of its credibility in that direction, saying it isn't credible enough. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is Marvel Studios, which continues to dismantle its connections to Marvel Comics. Kevin Feige, I think that this is going to yield some really fascinating results, but I'm not quite sure if they're going to be positive or negative. But at the end of the day, though, the buck is going to stop with Kevin Feige now because he has no one else to blame. So I hope he has some good ideas pent up and in store. Because a couple of things have come to light. First of all, Isaac Perlmutter apparently is single-handedly responsible for there not being any Black Widow toys, which I find absolutely, again, fascinating that this individual one person can control what toys Disney and Marvel distribute. But apparently, because he has toy experience in his background, I believe working with a company called Toy Biz, he says, oh, from my experience, female toys don't sell, we're not going to make any. Which has gotten him into so much trouble. I can't believe the obstinance of this individual that after all the social media campaigns, maybe the first time he's like, oops, my bad, but to continue with the policy is just absolutely mind-boggling. But anyway, the other development that's come about is that Kevin Feige has dissolved the creative committee, the Marvel Architects, which have been helping all comic book people with the movies. It's Brian Michael Bendis, Dan Buckley, Alan Fine, and Joe Quesada have all been taken off of working on the Marvel movies. That is a huge, aggressive move. And I really do wonder what's going to happen to the comics. Yesterday was comic book day, and I looked at my stack, and I was like, man, between Convergence and Battle World, I'm buying very few DC and Marvel titles these days because they're just like a mess. And I'm buying almost exclusively like Image and independent comics. And it's just also another fascinating development that the movie studios, while they're doing a great job for the most part with these characters on the silver screen, are just absolutely flushing the comics down the toilet. And I don't know if this is going to create some kind of internal war where the comics, what will be their revenge for being taken off of these movies. And also, if there's no coordination, how are you going to, a lot of people are saying that one of the strengths of Marvel has been that it's very accurate to the source material, right? But if Kevin Feige is firing everybody who's from the comics, does that mean he's going to go rogue? That he's going to start telling his own stories and create alternate universe storylines almost? Or will the comics become the alternate universe? What will become the primary version of these characters? It's just a really, again, fascinating situation that's developing. So we'll see. I don't think, they're saying now that Edgar Wright left because of notes from the creative committee. I find that absolutely ridiculous. Maybe it's true, but the fact that, Kevin Feige would have so little power to fight back these people from Marvel, I can understand why he would want to get rid of them if that's the case, but that Edgar Wright, after 8 years, would suddenly have a huge problem with the creative committee, it either says that story's being blown out of proportion, perhaps to make it, seem okay that Kevin Feige's disbanded the creative committee, or perhaps the ideas that Edgar Wright had maybe were horrible. We don't know what they were. Michelle McLaren got booted off of Wonder Woman, and at first we were all upset about it, but then we heard she wanted Wonder Woman to have a talking tiger sidekick, and we were like, yeah, you kind of have to go. So we don't know what the creative committee was fighting for, right? So it's just a really difficult situation. But if there's no coordination between the comics and the movies, what's that going to mean further down the line, or just very soon down the line? It's really, I'm very interested to see what comes out of this, but I'm holding my breath. Now for the third story of the day, I wasn't going to cover this story today. I was going to hold it for tomorrow. But then, as I was leaving the office yesterday, Cate Blanchett started trending on Twitter because people were excited about this development, and that gave me great hope for this film. And that's the announcement that Cate Blanchett is going to star as Lucille Ball in an I Love Lucy bio being written by, wait for it, Aaron Sorkin. That is an amazing project already. It's going to focus on Lucy and Desi's marriage and, of course, the Desilu empire, which spun out of their success with I Love Lucy, which at the time, because she was married to a Cuban, was incredibly groundbreaking. That was something you simply did not see on television, and something the executives did not want. Now, I could talk about I Love Lucy quite a bit because I'm not only a big fan of the show, I think pretty much everyone's grown up on it. I still watch I Love Lucy episodes when I'm looking for something short to watch. I always have a bunch of them on my DVR backed up just in case. It's that and Seinfeld's. And it's a show that still holds up. It's absolutely phenomenal. I've also, because I loved Lucy growing up, I've read Lucille Ball's bio. I know quite a bit about her and her life, and it's a very fascinating life. And a lot of really interesting things happen to her. And while the show is a light comedy, it's a very serious and dramatic life story with a lot of fighting, a lot of intrigue, a lot of soap opera aspects to it. I think it's going to make for a really interesting movie. And I also think it's interesting, or fascinating, that's the key word today, that Aaron Sorkin has gone into the bio business, right? So he's worked his way through the tech world, and now it seems that he's going to go into the the direction of entertainment. Now, there are two things I want to address on today with this story. First off is the casting of Cate Blanchett. I think that's really brilliant casting because I think a lot of actresses would try and use this as a way to parlay themselves into a comedy career, being like, aren't I funny playing Lucille Ball, huh? And, do it in a very self-serving manner. But I think that Cate Blanchett is a genuine actress, and I think she already has such a strong career that she's going to focus on just doing the role justice and really digging in and becoming Lucille Ball, and then moving on to her next role because she already gets so many great roles. So I think that's really savvy casting on the part of this film, and I think it's going to help it greatly. It'll also make it an instant awards contender because of Cate Blanchett's prestige. So I already feel this movie's off to a very good start. But the real next hurdle is going to be casting Desi Arnaz, and how Desi Arnaz, aka Ricky Ricardo, is depicted in this film. Because while he and Lucy had their problems, Desi Arnaz is an incredible figure in the entertainment industry. He directed episodes of I Love Lucy. He was a major producer with Desilu Productions. He had to fight a lot of discrimination at the time that he was coming up in Hollywood. And also, if you watch I Love Lucy episodes and you pay attention to his performance, he is an absolutely amazing straight man. You can't do comedy in a vacuum. You have to have great people to bounce off of. You need a good ensemble cast. And the whole I Love Lucy cast is very strong. But he, in particular, is very good. And I often feel he doesn't get his due, particularly because, he had a lot of extramarital affairs. So I think it's very easy to paint him as the villain. But I think that it shouldn't detract, and this, a lot of you will say, well, what about you're getting upset with Arnold Schwarzenegger and other people? Well, I think it depends on what you do. I had a problem with Arnold Schwarzenegger in that he brought it into his home and he paraded it in front of his family without telling them. That lie was a big problem for me. But Desi Arnaz was pretty transparent about what he was doing. And, Lucy knew what she was getting into when she married him. He was a Cuban playboy who was known for being quite the philanderer. So I think every situation needs to be addressed individually. And I just think that Desi Arnaz's work shouldn't not be depicted as with the quality that was there. So, and I'm hoping they cast someone really good in the role. I was thinking maybe Michael Pena, but I think maybe they should try and find a really strong Latino star who's very big with the Latino audience to help expand the demographic appeal for the movie. So I don't know his name off the top of my head. A friend of mine actually recommended him. I don't know if anybody here watches Devious Maids on Lifetime. It's the only show I watch on Lifetime, but it's absolutely fantastic. I really, really like it. And they had someone come on who was the husband who had disappeared in Mexico, and he's like, I think he's a big Latino soap star or something. And he's just really fantastic. And he came on, and he was a guest star this season, and I think he might be a good choice because he might be too television. I'm not sure. I don't know the Latino talent pool too well. So for those of you who live in South America, Mexico, who's a good actor you think might be a good choice? There's a lot of good talent on the Narcos show on Netflix right now. Actually, I highly recommend that show if you haven't watched it. So good. And maybe they could pull someone from that show. But Desi Arnaz, very talented individual, and just as talented as Lucille Ball. So I think that movie looks very good, and I'm very excited for it. And they've just announced it. They haven't even started shooting it, so we'll see what happens. So that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you, if you weren't too keen on my real news story first up, thank you for, going along with it at least, because it's important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of people. All right, thank you so much. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, that real news story, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye.